Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to get situated here. I think my slide deck is up. It's always interesting to try and figure those things out. So good morning. I'm Andrea Eshelman. I am the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Negotiator over at HSTA, and I've been asked by the Commission to come in and share a little bit about the Teachers Union. For those of you that have seen this presentation before or heard me talk before, not much has changed from a legal standpoint. The rules are sort of all the same, but I'm going to run through this. And then I've already been asked by at least one person to cover any information I can share on the new teacher settlement, which the teachers will be voting on tomorrow. So I did throw a slide in at the end. And I will be more than happy to try to answer any questions that you folks might have on the results of that settlement, assuming that it is ratified by teachers tomorrow. If you want to download this slide deck, I did create a bit.ly. It's there at the bottom, and I'll have it on the last slide as well. bit.ly/HSTA PCS 2023. And you are welcome to download the slide deck and use it. Throughout the slide deck, you will find hyperlinks to things like the statutes. My attempt to try and give you the resources that you need and make it simple for you to have points of reference as we go through. Are we good? Is there a question? Are we good? Okay. I'm going to try to see, are we going to advance? We're not advancing. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, so for those of you that might be new to maybe public education in Hawaii, or maybe just haven't had a lot of familiarity with unions, HSTA is the exclusive bargaining agent for bargaining unit 5, which is basically all teachers, those people who have to have a license from the Hawaii State Teachers, the Hawaii Licensing Authority for teachers. We represent teachers, counselors, school registrars. Those are kind of the primary categories, student activities coordinators, things of that nature. We do not represent athletic directors. We do not represent principals. Those are in bargaining unit 6. We have folks who are elected at the local school level, who are called school level leaders. Those are the HSTA representatives on campus. So you might hear the term faculty rep, or you might hear the term grievance rep, or you might hear the term Association Policy Committee, or APC, which is the problem-solving committee that meets with the director of the school principal to address issues of concern. We do represent all teachers regardless of membership status. While our membership numbers are quite high in the mid to high 90s, we do have some people that choose not to join, but we do have a requirement to represent them as well, and that's known as our duty of fair representation. Generally, employees have right to representation by HSTA if there is an employee who's under investigation, someone who has a claim of a contract violation, and then throughout the negotiations process. To provide you folks a little bit of a visual, this gives you an idea of how we are structured and how we interact with the charter school. So here at the top, you will see an HSTA staff person, a UNISERV director. I'll show you some photos in just a minute of the folks who are our staff. These are what we call field agents or UNISERV directors who represent our members throughout the state. We have 14 of them, and they are assigned via geographic area. So if you are in the Hilo area, then you would be working with Tiffany, for example. That person oftentimes is going to be the one interacting with the director, the governing board, or sometimes maybe your accounting folks, your HR folks, depending on how robust your administrative staff is on various issues related to teachers. At the teacher level, down here at the bottom, you see these two bubbles. We have faculty reps, and so each school is allowed to elect one faculty rep for every 10 people. And then we also have what's called an Association Policy Committee. If you look in the contract under Article 4, basically this is the problem-solving committee that deals with policies that the school might want to put in place that affect teachers and or issues that might be coming to ahead, maybe a grievance or a problem that needs to be addressed. That Association Policy Committee also includes a grievance rep whose primary job is to monitor contractual matters and alert us if there is something that needs to be grieved. In between that, there's a head faculty rep, so that's the lead person on campus for HSTA, and they interface generally with the UNISERV director and or with the director as needed. And I see a question.
I noticed that there's no arrow between the faculty and the director.
So these are just the reps specifically that are going to be dealing with it. Generally, there can be interaction between them. It just depends on how comfortable those folks feel in doing that interaction. So absolutely it can. So that's a good point. Okay. Just to give folks a face to some of the names that you might hear or people that might be emailing you, especially because of the pandemic, not everybody has been able to meet face-to-face. I think there's been a lot of emails and phone calls. I've been really encouraging my staff to get out and get to campuses. We have a lot of new staff, just like many other places. During the pandemic, we had a number of folks who retired. And so we've had a lot of new staff and then transfers as well. So in Honolulu, we have Terry Lau and Jonathan Leibowitz. In Central, we have Beverly Ikalani, who used to be in Windward. She transferred in the last year to Central. We have Amanda Lacar, who was hired in 2021. We have Justin Jansen out in Leeward. He used to be in Honolulu. We have a new UNISERV, Elima Long, who comes to us from the University of Hawaii. And then on Kauai, our Kauai UNISERV retired, and the replacement for Tom Perry is Judy Ryan. And then out in the Windward with Beverly moving into Central, we have Kristen Hamada, who actually came to us from the Nurses Union. On the neighbor islands, we still have Chris and Eric on Maui, and they work with Lanai and Molokai. And then in Hilo, a longtime UNISERV, Ray Yamanaka, recently retired, and Tiffany Dela Cruz is a new UNISERV there. And then on the west side of Hawaii Island, for Kona, Kohala, and Hamakua, we have Audra Zook, who replaced Maya Doherty, who also after many years retired. And then on Kauai, we have Judy. So Judy actually currently straddles and does HTA across the state, and then she also does Kauai Island. We also have a couple of folks that do additional contract enforcement. So you may at times work with two UNISERVs. So there might be a UNISERV that's just working day in, day out, training and supporting the teachers on the campus. And then if there's, say, an individual grievance or an employee investigation, we have other folks that step in on staff. We recently had someone resign. His name is Scott Miller. He is no longer with us. We're in the process of filling that position. Okay, so a couple of basics, and I'm just checking to see if there's any questions. Okay, we're doing good. These laws are hyperlinked here, but things that you should be aware of as it relates to labor unions generally and public sector. So employees who work on your campuses are public sector employees, and so public sector labor laws apply to them. Chapter 89 is the main collective bargaining law that outlines obligations of the employer, obligations of the union, what happens and what is covered and is subject to bargaining. It also outlines things like your obligation to transmit dues for members, your obligation to notify us if there's changes in your employees. So if you hire new people, if people resign, things of that nature. And then HRS chapter 302A is the general public schools law, and that is where you'll find the licensure rules. And then you folks are probably familiar with 302D, which is the charter school specific. And that's where things like the rules on the commission and your governing boards and things of that nature come into play. I will talk a little bit as we get to the end about the movement between charter schools and DOE, because this frequently comes up and causes confusion. So that is also in the law. Okay, so a couple of different things that you should be aware of related to 302D. So charter schools are exempt from a lot of state laws, which you probably know, but there are 3 areas that they are not exempt from: collective bargaining, discriminatory practices, health and safety. So your obligations to ensure that you have a safe workplace, your obligations to ensure that folks are not harassed or discriminated against in the workplace, and then your obligation to honor collective bargaining agreements and negotiate as appropriate. Okay, couple of references. 89.6, chapter 89.6, we are bargaining unit 5. So those are teachers and personnel of the same pay schedule, which we are modifying with this new contract. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, including part-time employees working less than 20 hours a week who are equal to 1/2 of a full-time equivalent, which is 17 hours. A little bit more in chapter 89 that might be helpful for you to know. Chapter 89.9 is probably the most important section of the law. It outlines what is subject to negotiations, what's subject to consultation. And so I just highlighted some key phrases in there. So if you're going to change wages, hours, you folks don't really deal with ETF because that's done at the state level, but other terms and conditions of employment and any matters affecting employee relations. So if you're going to do something that's going to change how you are operating your school, it's going to impact the working conditions of those teachers, you do have an obligation to engage in at a minimum consultation and potentially bargaining. One of the things that often comes up with charter schools is a question about how does this contract get figured out, the master contract. So the master contract is bargained at the table. We actually just finished bargaining and reached a settlement with the state on the 14th of April. We're in the process of getting ready for a ratification vote tomorrow. And at that table, there are 6 votes. The governor holds 3 votes. The Board of Education holds 2 votes and the superintendent has 1 vote. And so they, on their side, have to have at least a simple majority to be able to come to an agreement with HSTA. Folks frequently will ask, well, where's Charter's voice in that conversation? I would just say from HSTA side, we try very hard to provide opportunities to get feedback from our charter teachers and if at all possible, have them actively involved in the bargaining. We have folks who sit on our committee who are charter school employees. We have folks who have sat on our board who are charter school employees, and we get that feedback through them. On the other side, I can't force the governor or the Board of Ed or the superintendent to do anything. It is their responsibility to ensure that they are actively and properly representing all of the employers, which do include all the charter schools as well as the Department of Education. There is a subsection of Chapter 89 that you should be aware of, especially if you're a governing board member or a director, that allows you to bargain modifications to the master agreement. It's Chapter 89.10.5.5, and it allows you to negotiate a memorandum of agreement or a supplemental agreement that only applies to those charter schools. There are folks who frequently have sort of done the hard work of getting a supplemental agreement, and they just want to keep renewing it with each contract, with just making little tweaks to update as the master contract gets finalized, and that's perfectly fine. And generally we go through that process pretty painlessly. If you're a school that has never done that work, it can be a little bit daunting, and it really just depends on how much time and energy you want to put in and how much changes that you think are needed from the main contract. Common areas that charter schools usually negotiate additional memorandums or supplementals on would include evaluation, would include maybe some modifications to leave provisions, modifications to how the workday looks. Some of them modify additional supplementary pay categories. Sometimes they modify how they handle transfer processes within the school, people applying for different positions, things like that. Okay. The one thing I do like to remind folks, and this is part of the law that I don't think anybody likes, but there's a lot of kind of tricky language in 10.55 that talks about basically the charter being responsible for any of the costs for those additional negotiated agreements. And so unless you can get a legislator who's going to help you get that appropriation, generally anything that is negotiated supplemental to the contract has to be funded by the charter school. It's the same rule for the DOE. If the DOE wants to do a supplemental that has additional costs, they have to do that as well. And so that's always something to be aware of. Okay. Another area that you should be aware of is that periodically we will contact you to ask for an update on status of employees. And so that usually comes from my accounting office. You do have an obligation to share with us that information and also deduct the payroll deductions and pass them along to us for anyone who has chosen to join HSTA. Okay, and that's just more about the law for payroll deductions. Okay, so our master contract or the HSTA collective bargaining agreement is the general one you're going to follow. So I would say about a third of the charter schools just follow this contract. The color changes every time we bargain a new one. I'm hearing that they're talking about some sort of teal green this time. I don't know.
It was time for green.
The irony that our governor is named green has not been lost on me, but apparently that's the discussion. The team gets to decide. That's the one thing that you get. You don't get paid to be on the bargaining team, but for all your hours of work, they get they get to vote on the color for the new contract. So we'll see. The new contract, assuming everything goes well, we'll knock on some wood for the ratification vote tomorrow. We'll work on getting those updated and printed and out to folks over the summer. In addition, you folks might have a very comprehensive settlement, or excuse me, supplemental agreement. So it might be multiple pages long. You might just have an agreement on just one topic, or you might not need a supplemental, or you might just do an LOA. So I know recently we just had to do a quick letter for HTA because there was some confusion about something that we had negotiated in the supplemental around their 21 hours. And so we just did a letter to confirm, like, hey, we understand this is how we're going to interpret this. This was our intention, because there was some confusion among the staff about what was going on. I provide this slide not because I'm going to dive into it, but I think it's a helpful slide of just like links for you to go to. So there's this thing called the SASA portal, which is on the public side of the DOE site, and it does have a lot of the frequently used HR forms. May or may not be helpful for you, but there's just general information in there. Many of you folks have employees who are funded and paid for by the department, especially SPED teachers. And so sometimes they're going to be referencing certain things and processes for those folks. And so it'd be helpful to have access to that. I also linked to the guidelines for movements for teachers between DOE and charter. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the law section on that. I've linked to the link on the public side of the 5000 series of the school code. Fun fact, the public side one is not always completely updated. So sometimes they update parts of the 5000 series, but they don't update the PDF. As I find those things, I do try to alert them that it's not updated. And then the charters, the DOE does have a charter school HR handbook, which you folks should have access to, but I linked it there.
Andrea, that 5,000 code, are we like, what is the impact of that 5,000?
So the school code and the standard practices, which is sort of the interchangeable name that people use, is incorporated into the contract by reference. The 5000 series is the most common one because that is the one having to do with all the HR things. So things like I have a death in the family, my right to funeral leave, right? So most of the things that you deal with are funeral leave, but there's other nuances in there, like how do I count months for probation? How do I determine that this person qualified for a full semester of probation? There's language in there that gives you kind of those rules. In theory, a charter school could create their own separate policies that would supersede those. You would have to consult with us on that, right? So if you wanted to say, oh, we're going to give a person a semester's worth of probation for just working 1 month, well, you'd have to consult with us that you want to deviate from the 5000 series.
And that would be referenced in the supplement.
If you wanted to deviate, you could reference in supplemental, or we could do a standalone kind of one-off thing or what have you. Yeah. I'm going to go a little bit over the salary schedule and pay. I will note that with the new contract, the schedule is going to look radically different. We are in the process right now of meeting with the department to create those schedules and literally cross-check every single calculation. But I'll just show you folks here what the current schedule looks like, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the new one will look like. So
I think there's people asking questions.
oh, okay, thank you. Can we get a copy of these slides with the links? Yes. So I have a bit.ly. So it's bit.ly HSTA PCS 2023. I'll have the link at the end as well. Anything else? The session is being recorded. Okay. All right. Thanks. So big picture, when you are trying to figure out where to put people on the salary schedule, there are classifications and steps. Classifications are education. Steps typically are connected in some way to the duration of time the person has been in the system. That is a longer discussion for another day. For those of you that have been around, you'll be familiar with the whole compression dynamic and the adjustments that we did last fall. And then there is this line of which you have to have a state approved teacher ed program. And so that places you at one part of the schedule. If you don't have that state approved teacher ed program, that places you at another part of the schedule. And I'll talk about that in a sec when I show the schedule. So one of the things that you have to figure out is where you're going to put people initially. The contract allows for up to 6 years of placement. Typically, a lot of charter schools, though, are receiving employees who are coming from another DOE school or even a charter school. And so typically they will match wherever that person left. So if they were on class 4, step 10, they're going to match that. And we don't have an issue with that. We would like to see and want that continuity of placement within the bargaining unit. 21 hours is another piece that affects the pay. And I'll show you on the current schedule and then talk a little bit about what the plans are going forward. And then shortage differentials, to which we got funding for in the last year for you folks, and compression adjustments for which we got funding. I'm not going to get into sort of any particular schools. I know that folks are working with Danny and some have had their money released, some are still working on data, so on and so forth. All of those are subject to consultation, and you have to do some data work to figure out who qualifies, I guess is the easiest way to say that. And I see sending offer letters now. We have to place using contract schedule suggestion on best way to note that an updated schedule is forthcoming as we discuss placement. Okay. The schedule will definitely be updated for anybody who's an instructor. Everybody else is just going to be dollar amount updates. So there won't be too much difficulty if they're on the main section of the schedule. And I'll show you guys that in just a sec. So I know this is ridiculously small, but this is the schedule that we're currently using. The gray blocks include the 21 hours. The white blocks is the current base salary. Going forward, 21 hours, as long as this contract gets ratified, will be permanently embedded into the contract. Be simplified of how you implement it. It'll be put into the work year section of the contract. And so you will basically have 27 hours throughout the year to add to the school day. So you already have 6 in extended day, which is in the work year section. You have 21 that's in that additional MOU. They'll be put together a total of 27. And then for the 21 hours, because that's supposed to be specifically professional development, the other 6 hours have a lot more flexibility. They still will earn the 3 credits of professional development. So really strongly encourage you to actually do professional development, so you're not having to award PD hours for things that are not professional development like. So that's the first thing that will happen, is that essentially everybody will have a new base salary, right? And that's about 1.5% more that's permanently being added to the contract. So we won't have this weird schedule of the gray and the white blocks going forward. The other thing, and I don't know, can you guys see you can see my pointer. Okay. So these 3 steps here at the bottom, 1, 2, and 3, if you've ever taken a gander and looked at the numbers, they are quite low. They are not really a living wage. And so both sides were quite interested in adjusting this. And so all 3 of these steps are going to be gone in the next contract. There will be a creation of a new step 4, and it will be a single step that will be 3% less than step 5. And I will show you guys some numbers in a bit, but basically starting salary for an instructor, someone who does not have a state approved teacher ed program, will be in the $50,000 range. Everybody
Emergency hires.
Emergency hires. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So what you guys know as emergency hires, right? This will be people who are emergency hires. This will be people who are CTE and Hawaiian permit. This will be people who are folks that are coming to you. They have generally some kind of bachelor's degree, but they do not have a teaching program. They don't have that under their belt. The other thing that is going to change is the new schedule will allow the people, this going to be smushed in here, and these 1, 2, 3 will be gone. It will extend out. So you'll see here, there's this big white space. You can only reclass to class 4. It will extend out all the way to here. So in theory, someone could reclassify all the way across. And then there's also language. I don't think this happened too much in charters, but it definitely happened in the DOE. That say you reclass to class 5 by the time you complete your SATEP, you then are moved straight up. In the DOE, they reassess you, and if all you have is your bachelor's plus 30, you move back here. And so that has been a problem because people didn't understand why that was fair, and I agree. Even though, say, going from 45 to 54 is a great pay raise, it still didn't feel very fair because now you sort of lost the value of those classes that you took to get to class 4. So it'll reclass all the way across here. The other reason for that is that we have special permit folks. So we have CTE and Hawaiian permit folks who potentially have their permit for 5 years and then can renew it for another 5 years and technically never have to go get their SATEP. This will allow them to continue to have a path towards earning professional development. It will incentivize them to potentially work on their SATEP because they're not blocked by that end piece, that they could move and work maybe over a longer period of time instead of the 3 years that normal emergency hires are provided. Okay.
So can I ask a question about?
Yes.
My understanding was that people that were in steps 1, 2, and 3 couldn't reclass because it wasn't considered their initial classification until they completed their SATEP.
No, they can reclassify.
They can reclass. Okay.
Yeah. The thing that people get confused about though is some people will choose to some people have the idea that they should wait and not reclassify. And in the DOE system currently, I always tell people just reclassify because you'll be reassessed. So what gets funky is you can only enter initial classification, BA plus 30 or master's or doctorate, right? So that's the initial. So what happens is if you reclassify all the way across, which makes sense because you're taking coursework to get your SATEP, they will reassess you and then they will put you into the highest here, unless you have a doctorate, is going to be that class 3. And so we are changing that rule and now you'll be able to go straight up. So hopefully it's even more incentivizing people to continue to do professional development. But yeah, there's never been a restriction. There is a restriction that you cannot reclass in the first year. And that rule has not gone away. It's basically like you come in, you sit at that place for 1 year and you're earning credits. And so then at the end of the 1 year, now you guys could do a supplemental to remove that. But I think traditionally that rule has been in place to provide some semblance of sort of stability in budget planning and things like that. Okay, so those are the big changes that will happen at the bottom of the schedule. The other thing that will happen is the new schedule will have a class 8 on the right-hand side created in the 3rd year of the contract. The 3rd year of the contract, that class 8 classification comes with some restrictions that the DOE wanted in the contract language. I predict that there may be charter schools that are going to say, we don't necessarily want to match those restrictions. Will you modify them? Will you engage with us in a modification? And that is certainly possible. We have time because the new rule won't go into effect, or the new class won't go into effect until class 8. The thing that I think we have to have a larger conversation about is when you do that, potential impacts of if someone reclassifies within a charter school and they go back to the DOE, it may cause confusion and the DOE may not recognize that class 8. And so there might be implications. So I'm just sharing with you that class 8 is going to be created in the 3rd year. The restrictions that the department wanted in the contract were that you could only use credits earned after July 1, 2023. So if you had earn some credits and bank some credits, you can't use those to move to class 8. And that you have to have your sheltered instruction requirement completed. So that's the TESOL EL requirement of having 6 or the equivalency of 6 credits around sheltered instruction. And so you have to be complete with that before you can apply for class 8. There is one carve out for the credit restriction that if you have credits that you earn through your SIQ, your sheltered instruction qualification, you may use those regardless of when you earn them, assuming you haven't reclassified with them before. Very controversial. We're hearing a lot of feedback from teachers who are confused about the rules, thinking that they're applying to everything. I'll be very frank, and the superintendent was very clear, as was the Board of Ed. The sheltered instruction is something they feel is very critical, that every teacher should have those skill sets in their toolbox. And so they wanted to incentivize people spending the time to get it. The DOE's current procedure is they have like 7 different options. You could obviously, as a charter school, say, well, we're going to recognize something else as some other option, but there's a plethora of ways that people can get those credits. And I would think that they would benefit your students as well. People have asked me, well, is that a mandate? It is a federal expectation around civil rights protections for kids that schools are able to meet the needs of English language learners or English learners. And so it's actually been a requirement to have 6 credits for more than 20 years. And the DOE only in say like 4 or 5 years has really spent the time to say, hey, everybody needs to get this. Okay, I am looking. We have scheduled PD for 21 credits. If a teacher is constantly absent from attending these sessions, do they still get the PD credits? No, if they don't do the work, you don't have to give them the PD credits. They should, under the current rules, have an opportunity to make them up, but you are not obligated to award the PD if they did not do the hours.
You said under the current rules, are the rules
Yeah.
changing?
So I don't anticipate the rules
Okay.
changing. Yeah, I don't anticipate the rules changing. So, yeah. Okay. There are other additional pay that folks might qualify for as your employees. Supplementary pay for things like department grade level head. If you have, I don't know if any charter schools have like band programs or choral programs, but there are some things there. There's a supplemental pay for librarians, supplemental pay for folks that are running farms. I will note in the new contract, all the supplementary pay is being increased by 50%. And the small and large school department head and grade level chair pay is being collapsed into one category. So regardless if you're a big school, small school, doesn't matter. It's $1,900. For the year. Yeah. Other types of pay that folks might qualify or you might utilize. So there is a recall pay provision in the contract. You can offer recall pay to people you're not obligated, but you can offer recall pay if you have some sort of special project or something that needs to get worked on, say over the summer or a break, something, you know, a weekend or what have you. There's a recall provision in the work year section of the contract. And then there's a probationary bonus that you're obligated to pay once they complete probation and return in the following semester. Other types of compensation include national board certification, which is under the law. So it's $5,000 per year that you are certified as an MBCT. And then there is an additional $5,000 for certain types of targeted schools, CSI and TSI schools. And then any other compensation that charter schools decide to negotiate. A lot of them have done different creative ways of providing additional compensation. You'll see that line I have there on the slide. Be real careful and thoughtful about how you categorize and the type of work you're doing. There is, you know, just general casual employment. We've run into things where charter schools are doing everything from hiring people to clean the classrooms after school, to tutoring, to summer school. All of that is not our bargaining unit work. And so you should be very clear and explain to folks that that is part-time teacher rates, or that's part-time pay, that's casual employment, that is not employment under bargaining unit 5. Because if someone calls us and says, oh, I got in trouble as a summer school instructor, or I, you know, did something as a tutor, we can't technically represent them in that work. However, it gets a little bit gnarly in that if you are threatening to say take action against the teacher as a result of something they did while they were tutoring, then you have passed over and kind of pulled their teaching job into that conversation, and then we are obligated to represent them. It would be no different than if that teacher had, worked at Starbucks and got fired for doing something at Starbucks, and you heard about it and decided to try and punish them as a teacher, discipline them, or terminate them. And so just be aware of that, and I think be very clear with employees so they understand what job category they're working if they're working in other areas. This is the general payroll cycle. I will tell you that over the years, we have uncovered schools that have not followed this payroll cycle. There are some specific rules in the statutes around, like, you have to pay people on time. My recommendation is that you do try to stick to this payroll cycle, just because you'll be in line with every other school in the system, and it'll make your life a little bit easier. And then the other dynamic is, if you start to pay people too early, you're actually paying them ahead of the time they've worked. And we've run into problems where you have essentially fronted people money that they have not worked for, and then you have to go chase, you have to go chase them to get that money back if they suddenly quit a week into the school year. So typical cycle is you pay them 24 paychecks over they're prorated over the course of the year. That is a requirement. And that is a requirement so that people can continue to have their health benefits, and people can continue to have their ERS calculated and get a full year's service in the retirement system. Typical cycle is the first paycheck for 10-month teachers is August 20th, and the last paycheck is August 5th. That always throws people because you're already working into the new school year and you're getting your last paycheck for the prior year. 12-month teachers, same cycle, just 1 month earlier, because their school year actually runs July 1 to June 30th. And just so you know, their schedule is a different pay schedule. They're paid 20% more. So you take the 10-month schedule and you add 20%. That's how we get the 12-month schedule. And so there is a period of time when folks are not at work and they're still getting paid, and that's known as the summer pay. And those paychecks are typically June 5th, June 20th, July 5th, and July 20th. As I indicated, that helps cover medical and service credit. It also is a time period where you can potentially adjust if people have been on leave without pay. And so what the DOE does is, if you're not working, you're not getting a paycheck during that time, but you also have to do an additional calculation because it's all prorated. You have to go back and look at their summer pay and adjust accordingly if someone has been out on leave without pay for a long period of time. Okay. Big picture, work day, work year, scheduled work day. And I say that very deliberately. Scheduled work day is 7 hours, 35 hours a week. You cannot schedule people for more than that. You do have the ability within the contract to move those 35 hours around. So if you wanted to have 1 day a week that's 6 hours and 1 day a week that's 8 hours, there is that ability to flex that, as long as the total is not more than 35 hours. There's a bunch of rules around bell schedule building. Won't get into that now, but that is the general schedule. You potentially add 27 hours a year to that 7-hour day, right? 27 times, because that is your extended day time, or your 21-hour time. Some of you folks have negotiated to convert those 21 hours into full days and added them at the front, the end, the middle, wherever, to a full day of PD. That is something that we can do, and we don't have a problem with that. You need to make sure that every teacher has a 30-minute duty-free lunch. Duty-free means duty-free. That does not mean requiring them to sit in a common space and watch kids eat their lunch or supervise children in any way, shape, or form. It is 30 minutes duty-free. The work year is technically 190 days. When you see the new contract, you will see that it says now 193 days. And that's why I have those little asterisks, because when you add 21 more hours to the contract, you actually make the work year longer, because it's essentially 3 more days of work. And so that's why I have those asterisks there. So there'll be a slightly different calculation. It's weird because you actually only report to work for 189 days. The 190th, 91st, 92nd, and 93rd are converted into hours added to the workday. And just checking my comments over here. Sick leave. 10-month teachers earn 18 days a year. They're given that up front. 12-month, they're entitled to 21. You can convert up to 6 of those days for personal or professional development. It is a conversion. It is not an extra 6 days of personal leave. That's a common misunderstanding. And then 12-month teachers are entitled to 14 days of vacation. I will note 10-month teachers actually get vacation as well. Little known fact, the winter break is actually categorized as a vacation period in the contract, and as is the spring break. And so that is why the 12-month teachers don't get 21 days like other state 12-month workers, because their vacation period is already built into certain pre-scheduled vacation periods. Really important that you guys have a good leave tracking system so that you can kind of know where people are at. It's not uncommon for that to be something that falls through the cracks and becomes very painful and expensive for everybody across the board to try and figure that out at a later date. Other challenges that we see with charter schools is just really important to have consistent practices and have stuff written down. Really important to have timely and accurate notification of employment and personnel actions, and making sure that those payments and things are going to ERS and going to UTF. Not uncommon for us to see people who move from another charter or a DOE, and the receiving charter school makes a mistake and does not emphasize the need for folks to get re-enrolled in UTF. And we have seen people who have lost their UTF benefits and then have to go through a whole appeals process. And it's very painful and potentially affects people's health period. And so really important that you emphasize to new employees, especially if they're coming from other state locales, that they need to make sure that they fill out their paperwork again. Reclassification is responsibility of you as the charter school. Some of you choose to use the DOE services. Some of you choose to use your own. Your procedures are up to you. You do have to consult with us, but you get to decide how you're going to reclassify, as long as you're in line with the contract, which is the 15 credits to reclassify. I'm sorry.
In line with the contract or better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so the 15 credits are built into the schedule, are built into the contract. But what you recognize as an employer for accepting it as a reclassification credit is your judgment. You get to decide, yes, this is related to your work. I'm going to recognize this for purposes of reclassification. Other things to just be aware of: work comp. We have the charter schools have pretty high number of work comp cases. So that all goes back to sort of the HIOSH stuff, the health and safety. So please make sure that you're ensuring you have those things in place. And then the other area that we sometimes see complaints about is with EEOC or civil rights complaints or investigations. And then sometimes we run into issues around ADA. I think it's really challenging, and my hat is off to charter school directors who have to figure out how to navigate all of these things without, you know, a lot of infrastructure to manage it. And so those are all things you have to be aware of, your obligations under the federal and state law, to ensure that those are being met. And then we'll talk a little bit about teachers moving here in just a second. I talked about licensing already, so you should know everybody is supposed to have a license status of some sort with the licensing board. If you do not, you potentially, as well as the employee, can be fined $500 by the licensing board. This is the part about movement between the charter schools and DOE. So it's 302D26. The department, in conjunction with authorizers, shall facilitate movement of instructional personnel between department and charter schools, provided that, and it goes into stuff about comparable and verifiable professional development and evaluation standards, blah, 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 blah. So this is a long way to say that this is where you will find the rules about tenure. So this is the other part of the contract, or excuse me, the statute. Moving between schools, whether it's DOE to charter, charter to DOE, charter to charter, it is a movement. You are still a state employee. There are potential implications, because if there is a break in service, there could be implications related to ERS. So for example, if you quit at the charter in May and you go start working at the DOE in August, that is a break in service. And so there are implications there. To my knowledge, there is no current process to transfer in between any of those things. Very early on in the charter movement, there was kind of this dynamic that happened with the DOE and charters. Laws evolved, positions changed. There is no transfer process. It is not seamless. You guys are different employers, and this frequently confuses people. And I know many of you try your best to explain to employees. Sometimes they understand, sometimes they don't. But just be aware that basically the process is I apply to a charter school, I get offered a position, I resign from the DOE or the other charter school I'm at, and I go to the new charter. But there are implications if there's a break in service. The other piece is that frequently get asked about probationary period and tenure. You do not carry or transfer your tenure from employer to employer. So the probationary period is pursuant to the contract, which is 6 semesters. And then when you return in that 7th semester of probation, excuse me, 7th semester of employment, you're granted tenure, you qualify for the probationary bonus. It is not that you have to honor that tenure from the DOE or another charter school. You have to restart your probation. The concept being there, you're a different employer, you need to do your own assessment of whether those people are adequately passing evaluation, probation, all of that. Okay. Yeah.
Is this the one where the like counting of semesters towards tenure begins once they're?
So probation doesn't start until their CTAP.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could have an emergency hire for a number of years. And so they could be working for you for 5 years and still not be tenured. This is why it's really important for people to get their CTAP. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And then this is the contract language at the bottom, right? So the 6 semesters and the completing of probation and the 2,500. I will just share our position as it relates to this. If you have someone who has CTAP and they are working and you have chosen not to implement an evaluation system and you have not evaluated them, the HSTA's position is then they are satisfactory, they are effective. It is on you to make sure that you are doing evaluation of these probationary teachers. So if someone comes to us in semester 7 and they have been, CTAP complete, probationary for 6 semesters, and you have failed to evaluate them, we will challenge you if you try to say, no, you don't get the $2,500. That's not a sneaky way to try and avoid paying the probationary bonus. It's your obligation. Under the law, teachers are supposed to be evaluated on an annual basis, as are administrators. And if you're choosing not to do that, our position is that you have allowed that person and you have determined that they are effective by virtue of not doing it. So really, really important that you do an evaluation process. I know that this is something the commission emphasizes with the charters as well. This is the big picture, 30,000 foot view of the contract settlement. I will click over to our website here in just a sec. I think we're at time. Yeah. Oh no, we got about 5 minutes. It's a 4-year contract, which I think is great. That gives some stability, and especially for planning around costs and things like that. There are pay raises in each year. And Buffy, I see you rapidly writing this all down. There is a slide deck on our website you can download that has all of this in great detail.
I just learned better by writing.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, you don't have to write it all down if you don't want to. I'm the same way. I like to write stuff down. There are 2 step movements in the contract, one at the start of the 1st year, one at the start of the 2nd year. There's a restructuring of the instructor pay. There's an increase in the supplementary pay, and then the permanent, making 21 hours in the 3 BTA credits permanent, and the additional classification of class 8. So I'm actually gonna see if this will let me open up the website. Move this guy down a little bit. It's thinking very hard.
Can I ask a question while that's coming up?
Yep, sure.
The increase in pay, is it a percentage and then a step and then a percentage and a step?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
the
Okay.
first year, it is a 2% across the board. So basically, the first year is make the 21 hours permanent. So that's essentially
The pay rate.
the 1.5%.
Okay.
Add 2% to that.
Okay.
And then everybody moves a step, which is equal to 3%.
Okay.
If you are at 14B, which I don't know that you guys have many people that are 14B, but if you are at 14B, it is a $3,000 bonus. So on our website, there's a bunch of different things, but this is probably, if you guys are super nerdy and want to watch Osa and I from last night, we're making it all public, like there's nothing to hide. But what would probably be most interesting to you guys, I don't know if everyone is like banging up against our website today, but it's a little slow. So this is the slide deck on this page. And it has all of the summary of, yeah, so let me see if I can get this to do it this way. So this is the first year, a 2% across the board, a step movement. If you're at 14B, you get $3,000. In addition, anyone who did not receive compression adjustment. So those would be people who are at 14B before the compression adjustments, or if you have anybody that didn't receive compression adjustments because they're like new hires and there was no place for them to go because they hadn't accrued enough time, there's a $3,000 for them.
What?
Oh, what?
What?
Yeah, it's all factored into the costing. And then making the 21 hours permanent. And then let me see here. And then this is the instructor level adjustment. So eliminating step 1, 2, 3, creating a step 4, 3% between step 4 and 5, extending step 4 to the full length of the schedule. And then we negotiated all the language related to like, where do the CTE permit? And they have this other thing called a standard limited license CTE, where they go. Those people actually have a safe tab. This is the year 2, 3, and 4. So in year 2, it's a 3% across the board. In year 3, it is a step movement. 14Bs get 3,000 because there's no step for them to move to, and then adding a class 8 to potentially reclassify into, and that's a value of 4% more than class 7 if people reclassify. And then in 26, 27, it's a 3.5 across the board. The other thing that I will show you, which I don't know if it's linked on this page. Let me see here. Oops. Running a little slow. I was going to show you the salary just so you folks can kind of have an idea. So if you're somebody that likes to read like the actual summary of all of the stuff, there is this document that's on our website. You can read everything, but this is probably the thing that will be of most interest if you're trying to look at costing and things like that. So we prep this based on the raises. And so I'm going to just kind of zoom in to show you, for example, the emergency hire. So somebody who, the way you use this chart, this is like for informational purposes. So the way you use this chart is, this is class 2. So if you have a brand new emergency hire this school year, right? They're at class 2, step 1, they're at 38,500. The class, step 4 will be created at the start of the school year. They will be placed on step 4. They'll be moved to $50,000. And then the following year, there's a 3%, the following year, there's a step, and then a 3.5. So at the end of the contract, people who are currently at $38,000 in 4 years will be at 53,600. That's brand new, like step 1 people. If they're a little bit higher, they're all going to be on the same step. So one thing, like people are like, oh, this doesn't have a step 4. Well, step 4 hasn't been created, but this is like, you'll notice here, 53,600, 53,600, they'll all be the same rate, right? They'll all be the same rate. The whole idea was to bring up the base a little bit. So it's I mean, honestly, if you do the numbers, you can make more money take home as a day-to-day sub right now than an emergency hire because you don't have to pay your ERS. So it's to try and incentivize people coming into the system and staying.
Do I get to this from the slide deck from the webinar? Is
Um,
that how I get to this?
on, you know what, I'll put it in the chat. It's in this tentative, oops, where did it go? Sorry, it's in this summary.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So let me copy this and then the staff can let me see if I can put that in the chat. So yeah.
A comprehensive summary.
Yep. And then you'll see under salary and compensation, there's a 10-month and a 12-month schedule. It's in a couple of other places linked, but that's the easiest place to find it.
Honestly, I should make sure that my teacher is getting paid $38,000 a year, right? I'll be like, look, next year is getting paid. Huh? Yeah.
No.
I just feel terrible for him.
Yeah. So this also, I think, will help us retain. It'll help incentivize people to go get their SATEP because and for them to reclassify. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, encourage your people to go vote tomorrow.
They've received information.
Yep. It's all on our website. We're going to send out another reminder email tonight, and we have a new app. So if you're a techie person and you want an easy way to have the contract in your pocket, HSTA has a new app and the contract is there and it's searchable. It's really easy to use. And you don't have to be a member to have access. So that's another option. Okay. Question in the chat. Okay, I'm trying to my stuff all changed on me. So just a sec. Let me see here. I don't know what I did, but okay. This might be part of Danny question. Will we give him money? The moving forward will be built into the per pupil planning for budget considerations. Yes. So what the state does. So here is one of the, I personally think, wonderful byproducts of the compression monies is that we have actually gotten really good data on what you folks have by way of employees, and all of those were factors. So we used to, it's like 750, give or take, people who are ours in charter schools across the state. And when they would cost for BNF, we would always look at the numbers and say, this is not matching. We have like 750 people and you guys are only calculating for like 450 or 500. And what it was just this constant ebb and flow of getting data from the charters to the commission, to BNF, so that they can cost it. So all of those costs are factored in. You guys are probably well familiar with the convoluted calculation that happens to extract and figure out the per pupil. But yes, those increases are supposed to be factored into the cost of the collective bargaining increases and should show up in your per pupil. I'm sure the commission staff can explain it much more eloquently than I am, but all of the cost of all of the bargaining unit, all of that was factored into it. The total package, not including any class 8, is $577 million. So looks like there's another one. And then I think someone asked, has to be voted on. Yes. So it has to be ratified. The ratification is tomorrow from 3 to 6. And then, oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is about what we refer to as JEPD. Does anyone else call that the 21 hours job embedded professional development?
I've never heard that acronym, but there you go.
We call it JEPD. Anyway, what I find, and I've kind of found from the beginning, is that teachers feel like it's something that we are imposing on them. They don't necessarily see it as an opportunity, and not and I'm just wondering if you ever hear from anyone else that they experience that, if there's anything that you do to try and tell teachers, hey, we bargained this in for you.
Yeah, we do tell them that. I think it really depends on the quality of what's being provided.
Genuinely doing real professional development.
And then I think it's also just people understanding, so I will tell you, getting this embedded into the contract going forward is huge. The state legislature hates this provision of the contract, and they actually wanted it taken completely out because it is a double dip. you get paid
Yeah.
for that time and you get professional development time that you can use for reclassification. So, I don't know what they're going to say when they find out that the governor agreed to embed it, but it's embedded. So generally it has to do with quality, but it also just, I think, has to do with folks not even understanding, like, you're getting paid for this time, you're getting the PD
Right.
credits. Like sometimes they just don't get that.
Like Matt's agreeing with me in the chat, right? Matt saying.
Yeah. And it's been around in Hawaii since 2013. It is extremely novel. It's not uncommon in other jurisdictions to have paid paid, waiver day type things where you're doing professional development. It is extremely uncommon to also get PD credits that can be used for reclassification. It's pretty novel. And it's a huge benefit that people don't understand, because if you stay at the same employer and you do nothing else, every 5 years, you're giving yourself a pay raise because you could reclassify on those credits. And it's nothing to sneeze at. From class 2 to class 3, it is 8%. From class 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, to 6 is 4% between those. It's 6% from class 6 to 7, and then now it'll be 4% to class 8. Don't ask me about the history of that. It's a long history of like the percentages, but like class 2 to 3, an 8% raise just for like showing up at work and doing the PD, or you do a few extra classes and you could speed that up, right? It's a huge employee benefit. We do get people who want to know if they can opt out. The answer is no. Like, that's the deal. And the other piece is that we know that administrators value that time to be able to have professional development time in their schedules. And so we saw a huge uptick last school year of principals in the DOE asking for contract exceptions to add waiver days, so non-student days, to the calendar, because they have to do that because they lost the 21 hours. From my perspective, wait, I'm sorry, gotta see what this says.
We have to wrap up.
Yep. Baffling. So why is the new 21 hours, 27 pound better? Some precedents. So the idea is that it's embedded permanently and we don't have to get funding going forward, that they will build that into the schedule. Before that, we had to go back and it cost about 25 million, give or take, depending on the year, for us to ask every time we had to get more funding for it. So. All right.
Great, thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.